There's a pattern in history that strikes the same way every time. A system that looks unbreakable turns out to be held together by one fragile link nobody bothered to question. In 1929, that link was credit. In 1973, it was oil embargoes. In 1979, it was refinery paralysis. And analysts suggest that in the modern world, the next fragile link might be diesel, the quiet backbone of the global economy, the fuel that keeps farms alive, factories moving, and supply chains breathing. Here's what nobody tells you. The world doesn't run on gasoline, electricity, or even money. It runs on diesel. Money only matters because diesel moves things. And when diesel margins shrink, the economy itself begins to tremble. Imagine waking up in a country with just 25 days of diesel supply in reserve. Not a year, not a month. 25 days. That number doesn't mean the system will collapse in 25 days. It means that the buffer, the shock absorber, is razor thin. One refinery outage, one storm, one surge in demand, and suddenly the margin between normal life and systemic strain begins disappearing hour by hour. Let me show you exactly how. Because the danger isn't the number. The danger is how fast the world can slip from abundance to shortage, and from shortage to panic. In the first 200 years of industrial civilization, everything that built prosperity, grain shipments, steel production, coal transport, ocean freight, agricultural harvesting, depended on diesel-powered machinery or its predecessors. In 1944, entire military campaigns rose or fell on fuel convoys. In 1973, when Middle Eastern nations cut oil exports, Western economies were plunged into chaos. Inflation spiked, factories idled, lines at gas stations stretched for blocks. People sat in their cars for hours, staring at a single number on a pump that refused to move. The nightmare of 1979 repeated the fear. When the fuel stops, everything stops. But here's why this matters for today. History shows that fuel shortages don't reveal where systems break. They reveal where systems were already broken. The 1973 crisis exposed how deeply Western nations depended on foreign oil. The 1979 crisis exposed how vulnerable refining capacity had become. The 2000 UK fuel protests exposed how quickly a modern country can teeter when trucks stop rolling. It took less than 48 hours for supermarkets to thin. Less than 72 hours for hospitals to warn of disruptions. Less than a week for the economy to lurch. Everyone thought they were safe. They weren't. The real danger wasn't the dwindling diesel. It was the expectation that someone else would fix it. This is where the pattern begins. Modern life is so interconnected, so optimized, so delicately timed that even a whisper of a diesel shortage sets off a sequence that feels eerily familiar across centuries. First comes disbelief. It's temporary. Then inconvenience. Prices are rising. Then delay. Shipments are backed up. Then panic. Why is this aisle empty? And finally realization that the system was never designed for stress, only for speed. Let me show you exactly how a 25-day diesel buffer turns into something far more dangerous. Diesel inventories don't represent a warehouse full of barrels waiting untouched. They represent a constantly circulating stream. Fuel flows from refinery to distributor to truck depot to vehicle to exhaust pipe in a never-ending loop. The system expects the loop to remain smooth. This means 25 days of supply counts on refineries continuously replenishing every gallon burned. If they slow down, if they go offline for maintenance, if hurricanes disrupt Gulf pipelines, or if shipping delays occur, the loop tightens. Not by days, by hours. Here's the mechanism. Diesel shortages never arrive as a single event. They arrive as a distortion of time. A 6-hour delay becomes a 12-hour backlog. A 12-hour backlog becomes a 24-hour shortage. A 24-hour shortage becomes a regional spike in freight rates. And freight rates are the bloodstream of prices. A carton of strawberries doesn't cost more because strawberries changed. It costs more because the diesel truck that carried them changed. Here's why this matters. The economy doesn't collapse when diesel runs out. It strains when diesel becomes uncertain. The uncertainty itself forces every participant in the supply chain to change behavior. Trucking companies start prioritizing high-margin or high-priority routes. Farmers delay planting or harvesting operations that require diesel-powered machinery. Construction slows as excavators, cranes, and loaders wait for fuel deliveries. Rail networks, which rely heavily on diesel locomotives, adjust schedules and loads. Power grids dependent on diesel backup generators become more cautious, and everyday consumers see the effects far later in higher prices, delayed deliveries, and fewer choices. This is the trap. Modern society has built itself on just-in-time logistics. Inventory is no longer stored in warehouses. Inventory is stored in motion, on highways, in trucks, on container ships, in distribution hubs. When the motion slows, inventory disappears. Not tomorrow, today, not in weeks, in hours. Historical crises show this clearly. In the 1973 oil shock, panic broke out because the system had no room to absorb volatility. People lined up for gasoline because they feared others would line up for gasoline. The crisis wasn't fuel scarcity alone. It was confidence scarcity. In the 1979 crisis, refineries were offline, geopolitical tension surged, and the world's most advanced economies found themselves rationing. At first, it looked like a temporary inconvenience. Then the bill arrived. Inflation soared, savings evaporated, businesses folded, the rhythm of society broke. Let me show you exactly how diesel shortages trigger emotional and financial sequences that are nearly identical across time. First, people deny the reports. Second, they feel annoyed by shortages. Third, they worry. Fourth, they panic buy. Fifth, they blame institutions for failing to foresee the danger. And finally, they adjust their behavior in ways that reinforce the crisis, slowing consumption, hoarding necessities, avoiding discretionary travel, postponing purchases. The emotional cycle becomes an economic cycle. The economic cycle becomes a logistical cycle. And by the time policymakers respond, the system is already tangled. Here's what nobody tells you. The fragility of diesel supply isn't measured in gallons. It's measured in how fast those gallons turn into work. Diesel powers the vehicles that plant crops, harvest grain, deliver fertilizer, transport cattle, and move food from rural farmland to urban centers. Diesel moves pharmaceuticals from cold storage to clinics. Diesel powers freight trains that carry chemicals, building materials, cement, gravel, copper, timber, and steel. Diesel drives the generators that keep data centers online during outages. It is the quiet force behind the loud world. But even deeper than that, diesel is a symbol of something larger, the economy's dependence on invisible chains. Most people never see diesel. They never touch it. They never think about it. And yet, their entire quality of life depends on it. If the trucks stop, the shelves stop. If the shelves stop, the economy stops. And if the economy stops, confidence stops. And confidence is the oxygen of modern markets. The biggest question emerges from that truth. What actually happens behind the scenes when diesel margins tighten and the system begins to deform? It's not the trucks themselves that fail first. It's not even the refineries. It's the hidden architecture between them. The contracts, the delivery schedules, the shipping queues, the trucking dispatch models, the warehouse inventories. The danger isn't what people see. It's what they ignore. And the story behind that hidden architecture, the real chain of events that unfolds when diesel supply tightens, is where the next chapter begins. Here's the mechanism behind every diesel-driven crisis. Systems don't fail at the point of scarcity. They fail at the point of compression. A modern economy is like a machine built from spinning gears, all timed to rotate with flawless precision. Diesel is the lubricant those gears depend on. When supply tightens, the gears don't stop immediately. They grind, they heat, they begin resisting motion. And while nothing dramatic happens at first, the stress inside the system grows with every turn. Some economists argue that this invisible stress is more dangerous than actual shortages. Because once compression starts, it spreads, from refineries to trucking fleets, from trucking fleets to warehouses, from warehouses to store shelves, and from shelves to households that never realized their stability depended on something as ordinary as diesel. Let me show you exactly how compression moves through the system step by step. It starts when refineries hit seasonal maintenance cycles or when shipping delays slow the arrival of crude. diesel inventories fall faster than expected. Wholesale prices jump. Trucking companies respond by trimming routes that don't pay enough to cover the rising fuel cost. Grocery chains see delivery windows slip from the usual 2 hours to 8 or even 12. Perishables, produce, dairy, meat arrive less fresh, less frequently, sometimes spoiled. A single delayed refrigerated truck can wipe out thousands of dollars of inventory before it even reaches the loading dock. Here's what nobody tells you. The economy doesn't collapse when diesel runs out. It collapses when diesel becomes unreliable. In the next layer of the chain reaction, manufacturers begin feeling the pressure. Factories depend on diesel for freight, but also for the upstream supply of raw materials. A furniture plant needs lumber. A pharmaceutical plant needs chemicals. A car factory needs steel and electronic parts. When shipments start arriving late, production schedules fracture. Workers arriving for shifts discover they have no materials to work with. Overtime spikes in one area, while layoffs loom in another. Not coordination, friction. And friction, multiplied across thousands of factories, becomes the drag that pulls an economy downward. Everyone thought they were safe. They weren't. The real danger wasn't what they saw. It was what they ignored. From the factories, the pressure moves outward. Freight trains rely heavily on diesel locomotives. If diesel supply tightens regionally, rail companies alter their schedules to prioritize essential goods. Consumer goods get bumped. Congestion builds. Port operators face containers piling up faster than they can be moved inland. Warehouse managers begin rationing space. Retailers start issuing out-of-stock notices to manufacturers. In time, consumers feel the stress through delayed packages, price surges, and empty shelf spots. Not catastrophic absence, but a subtle thinning that makes people uneasy. This is where the pattern begins to resemble every major systemic crunch in history. In 1973 and 1979, the crises didn't start at the gas pump. They started in the psychology of delay. Waiting changes behavior. When people wait for fuel, they drive less. When companies wait for freight, they ship less. When retailers wait for inventory, they order less. And ordering less becomes producing less. Producing less becomes earning less. Earning less becomes spending less. A fuel shortage becomes an economic slowdown, not because the resource vanished, but because the confidence that held the system together unraveled. Here's why this matters. Modern diesel inventories in many nations fluctuate between 25 and 40 days of supply. Analysts suggest that is normal. Until it isn't. If multiple stressors converge, refinery outages, shipping disruptions, geopolitical tensions, or regional demand spikes, that buffer can shrink rapidly. And because the global supply chain is so interconnected, pressure in one region can ripple into shortages in another. One scenario suggests that even with adequate national supply, local bottlenecks can trigger micro-crises. Truck stops running dry, farm operations delayed, emergency services triaging routes, construction sites pausing work. Let me show you exactly how these scenarios branch into three possible futures. Scenario 1. The soft landing. Refineries increase output. Imports stabilize. Price spikes settle. Trucking companies resume normal operations. Consumers feel only mild inconvenience, a few higher prices, some slower shipments, and the crisis dissipates quietly. It's not dramatic, it's not cinematic, but it's the scenario policymakers hope for because it maintains the illusion of stability. Scenario 2. Rolling shortages. This scenario plays out like a wave. One region experiences tight supply, then another. Diesel becomes more expensive on one coast than the other. Trucking fleets shift operations. Retail prices climb. Farmers delay planting or harvesting. Manufacturers slow production. Nothing collapses outright, but everything slows, thins, strains. According to some analysts, this scenario is the most plausible because it mirrors patterns already observed during past energy squeezes. Scenario 3. The hard break. This isn't guaranteed, far from it. But it's the scenario analysts keep modeling because history shows how fragile logistics can be under the wrong combination of pressures. A hard break occurs when a major refinery outage overlaps with shipping disruptions, geopolitical tensions, or weather extremes. Inventories plunge. Prices spike violently. Trucking companies pull trucks off the road to avoid operating at a loss. Deliveries cease for low-margin goods. Supermarket shelves thin in days. Hospitals issue supply warnings. Governments intervene. And a nation that believed itself stable discovers how quickly a diesel-driven society can seize. Here's the trap: hyper-efficiency. The world eliminated redundancy to maximize profits. It traded safety for speed. It traded resilience for precision. It traded warehouses full of inventory for trucks full of inventory. Inventory that no longer exists the moment those trucks stop moving. Hyper-efficiency looked like a miracle. Then the bill arrived. Some economists argue that if this pattern applies to modern nations, the next major diesel squeeze wouldn't merely be a fuel story. It would be a story about the structural weaknesses the fuel shortage exposes. Weaknesses in energy grids, food distribution, medical supply chains, manufacturing rhythms, and the psychological stability of markets. One scenario indicates that the real shock wouldn't be the shortage itself, but the realization of how little stands between normal life and systemic breakdown. Here's what nobody tells you. Modern collapses don't look like explosions. They look like slow-motion fractures, diesel shortages that start regionally, grow quietly, and reveal how dependent every facet of modern life is on one resource almost nobody thinks about. But here's why this matters for every viewer. History teaches that the winners of energy shocks aren't the strongest or the wealthiest. They're the ones who build buffer, redundancy, and optionality. The losers are the ones who assume that because the trucks moved yesterday, they will move tomorrow. And if this framework is right, even partially, then studying diesel isn't about studying fuel. It's about studying the skeleton of the global economy, the hidden architecture holding together food, medicine, construction, energy, and manufacturing. It's about seeing the trap before you step into it. It's about understanding that power doesn't belong to the nations with the biggest armies, but to the nations with the most resilient logistics. If this changed the way you see modern systems, from the grocery aisle to the highways outside your window, then the answers aren't hidden in speculation. They're hidden in history.